President Trump was the first and so far, I think, almost the only one among the Western leaders who repeatedly, with conviction, several times stated that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO. Cheating is the key word for what was happening. They literally exterminate anything Russian. President Trump, who, as I mentioned already, seems to understand much more about what is going on than any European leader. This time, when President Trump suggested another Black Sea deal, Putin said, yeah, we are ready, but another initiative of President Trump was 30-day moratorium, not a total ceasefire, but 30-day moratorium on attacking energy infrastructure. During this phone conversation, President Putin immediately agreed. At that moment, 7 drones, Russian drones, were airborne. And Putin gave order to shut them down, which was done.
Has there been any direct or indirect contact by the Ukrainian side here in Antalya?
Not to my knowledge. Look, I can only tell you that in none of our contacts with the Americans, in none, be it phone conversation, be it meeting in person, this issue was never raised or even hinted upon. Never. And I think that President Trump and his people, they are very experienced in life. And when you understand life, it's much easier to do politics. And since he understands life, I believe those who understand life, they would never even think about trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Sergei Lavrov, a major player on the world stage from Russia, just came out and opened up about the meetings that he had with the United States under the Trump administration. Sergei Lavrov is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Well, he speaks fluent many languages, Sinhala, Diwali, English, and French, and that's addition to his native Russian language. He spoke openly in English here and quite candidly about the things that were discussed behind closed doors. A lot of topics were confronted here, from the issues of the African colonization, the problems infused by the Biden administration, the lack of transparency and aggression from Macron, the EU and Zelensky, and he also discussed President Trump's cabinet in hopes of a multipolar world in resetting the standards for fairness in global economics and trade. He didn't shy away from hurting any feelings in the interview, which most will appreciate here. But for anyone who wants to understand the details of what is beneath the mainstream media surface on Russia and its views, well, this is worth watching. You're probably going to be more informed by watching this interview than you would by listening to a year of the mainstream media outlets' news and opinions on the matters at hand. So if you want to be educated on what you're talking about when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, Africa, the United States, and all things therefore, you might want to watch this. So, ladies and gentlemen, grab yourselves a drink. And without further ado, here is Mr. Sergei Lavrov.
So I believe we just must have these discussions about security, Eurasian security, but in the context of the multipolarity movement, which is shaping itself up objectively.
You've mentioned on many occasions that your country's relationship with Western neighbors essentially depends on their willingness to acknowledge and rectify some mistakes. You've gone over some of them in the past 15, 20 minutes. But I want to ask, and we talked about the U.S. administration, how is it like to have Donald Trump on the other side? Is it easier? Because in the last 48 hours, where all of a sudden we're talking about the possible lifting of sanctions against your country's flagship airline, Aeroflot. We had the release of Ksenia Karelina, the ballerina. Is there a potential for more movement?
There is always a potential. And as I said in my opening remarks, nothing wrong if the US and Russia have good relations, if US and China have good relations. And what is going on between us and the Trump administration is really a very banal thing. Countries talk to each other without dictating to each other, without asking for any precondition. They just talk to each other. China and the United States, they have many differences. Russia was doctrinated by Biden administration as the immediate threat, China as the long-term biggest challenge to the American dominance. So competition in the world of economy, you see what kind of forms it acquires. And Taiwan, the situation in the Strait of Taiwan, the situation in South China Sea, who is going to have more influence with countries of East, South Asia. And they exchange statements, China and the United States, which are not very pleasant to each other, including on Taiwan. When the West, headed by the United States and other Western countries, they say we recognize, we follow one China policy, but they immediately add, but don't even think of touching the status quo. And what is status quo? It is not. It is not one China policy. And from time to time, we hear from Washington the threats to Beijing. Don't even think of using force. This would be catastrophic. So they exchange niceties publicly, but they never stopped talking to each other at the level of foreign ministers, ministers of defense, national security advisors, and presidents. Somehow Biden administration decided that with Russia it should be different. Russia must learn a lesson, and this lesson, this punishment, would be in the form of isolation. Stupid, to put it very politely, and not talking to each other. So Trump, what Trump is suggested is come back to normalcy, to stop this idiotic posture, which was, I think, which was a disgrace for the American role in the world affairs. Let me put it this way. Yes, we discuss bilateral relations, starting with the normalization of the work of the conditions in which our embassies work. Obama administration started throwing out diplomats. He stole 5 pieces of diplomatic property, which are still under arrest. Just like Biden administration has stolen the Russian assets. And they are now thinking what to do with it so that not to create a precedent. They created precedent already. And if they believe that they should not touch the body of the stolen money, but they can steal the interest and spend it on Ukraine, this is disgusting logic. And it shows that neo-colonial thinking never left these people. But the embassy activities, issuing visas in certain time frame, not waiting, so that diplomats don't wait for years to get a visa, to normalize the issuance of the U.S. visas to the Russians who are admitted to the United Nations Secretariat. There were also problems. And yes, we want to see what joint project we can consider and discuss together. This was the proposal from the Americans. We never rejected proposals to cooperate in economy, in conflict resolution, never. And when we met with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, together with President's advisor Ushakov in Riyadh, we touched upon some regional issues, Middle East, the situation with the Iranian nuclear program, some other topic, and of course, we discussed Ukraine, and I will repeat again what I said then, and I repeated this publicly also. When we speak about eliminating root causes of any conflict, including Ukrainian conflict, this is the only way to resolve the problem and to establish long-lasting peace. Remove root causes. President Trump was the first and so far, I think, almost the only one among the Western leaders who repeatedly, with conviction, several times stated that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO. And this is one of the root causes which we quoted so many times. They also mention now another thing which related to the root causes, namely territorial issue. Mm-hmm. They publicly, including Steve Witkoff, they recognize that the territorial issues would have to be handled in the context of the long-lasting settlement. And
this is the Americans.
The Americans, yes. And I would like to, by the way, when Ukrainians and the U.S. delegations in Riyadh agreed on some paper in favor of 30-day ceasefire, this was done in the context of the Americans saying NATO and territories inevitable. No NATO and discussion on the status of territories. Ukrainians and the people like Macron, Starmer, and Ursula von der Leyen, now they say Ukraine is in favor and Russia is against the ceasefire. But they lose sight, I think, on purpose, from the nuances, as Putin called them, NATO and territories. Because it is in the context of these aspects that the American proposal was put forward. Immediately after this was mentioned by the Americans, Zelensky administration said, NATO is none of your business. Territories we don't discuss. We need arms, and arms. And then, since it was in time of discussions of this peacekeeping thing, Zelensky said, we don't need peacekeepers, we need fighting units. So the schizophrenia of these mutually exclusive statements is very obvious. But on territories, I want to make a very important point.
Sure.
We are not about territories. We are about people who live on these lands, whose ancestors lived there for centuries, who founded cities like Odessa, Catherine the Great, who built factories, who built roads, ports, and these people, by twist of history, during the Soviet days, became not part of Russia, but part of Ukraine, because this was considered a consolidating factor to neutralize the ultra-radicals living in the western part of Ukraine when it joined the Soviet Union after the war. The people who live there, they are being deprived of all human rights. I quoted the UN Charter, which in Article 1 says everybody must respect the rights, human rights of every individual, irrespective of race, gender, language, or religion. Religious and language rights of anybody who is ethnic Russian and lives on the territory which used to be Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, they were deprived of their basic rights. The Russian language has been prohibited at all stages of education, in the areas of culture, media. Russian books have been thrown out of the libraries. The Nazists in Germany were burning them, but Ukrainians are much more smart. They utilize them and get money for this, you know. So, but everybody is happy. And recently, the canonic Ukrainian Orthodox Church was prohibited by law. They literally exterminate anything Russian. When in 2021 in September, long before the operation which we had to launch, Zelensky was asked in an interview what he thought, and at that time the Minsk agreement was still valid, though later Germans, the French and the Ukrainian president before Zelensky admitted that they never intended to implement them. They needed more time to arm Ukraine. Speaking of the ceasefire for 30 days, logic is the same. But in September 21, Zelensky was asked what he thought about the people on the other side of the line of contact in Donbass. And he said, trying to sound clever, you know, there are people and there are species. And my advice to those who live with Ukraine but feel associated with the Russian culture, for the sake of your kids, for the sake of your grandchildren, get out to Russia. And just a couple of weeks ago, in another interview, when he was asked what is driving him, you know, he said, hatred to Russia. The interviewer wanted to clarify to Putin. He said, no, to all Russians. And this is said by the person who, during his artistic days, was defending the right of Ukrainians to speak Russian. And he said, get lost. Don't even think about touching the Russian language. It's our history. So this is where we are. Hatred is not the best guide. Can you imagine? By the way, I want to, maybe somebody knows, Israel never prohibited Arab language. No? I don't think so. So I think Ukraine is the only country on earth which is multinational and the language of one huge ethnic group is prohibited. So make it, and if you read and listen to what the West is saying, EU, NATO, especially EU, human rights is on top of everything. When they discuss Venezuela, Russia, Serbia, Turkey, human rights, they never forget about human rights. Check what they're saying on the situation in Ukraine. They say Zelensky and his team defend European values. If your value is exterminating the language of those who founded the country, if your value is to glorify Nazis and their collaborators who were convicted by the Nuremberg Tribunal, to whom you put monuments, whose birthdays you celebrate as national holiday, while ruining, toppling the monuments to those who saved Europe from Nazism, toppling the monument in Odessa, which I mentioned already, to Catherine the Great, who founded that city. By the way, soon after this monument to Catherine the Great, the Empress was toppled, UNESCO granted the Odessa central region where the monument was located the status of the World Heritage. It's such a shame to the lady who happens to be French and happens, I think, by default to become Director General of this respected organization.
Minister Lavrov, all right, so you eliminate the root cause, and you talked about territory. I was just in a session talking about the European security structure, and on there was the Ukrainian foreign minister, and he says, when it comes to territory, I hear your concept, your idea, your position on territory, but they're not going to accept anything less than the 1991 borders.
It's not about them accepting it. It's about making 100% certain that the people who have been living there for centuries are not deprived of their inherent right. And if Ukrainian Nazist regime, I cannot describe it otherwise, enjoys the cover from the European Union, which, as I just mentioned, never dropped a word about the situation with human rights in Ukraine, then this is not our problem.
Okay.
We listen to those people who voted at referendum to join Russia to restore all their rights, which belong to them by international law and by history, by justice.
Okay. You have stated on numerous occasions that it is a hostile act to even entertain the idea of foreign peacekeepers. Would, under any circumstance, the Russian Federation think about neutral peacekeepers in the territory?
The biggest advocates of something like stability force, sustainability force, are thinking about any neutral force. They say we, Macron and Starmer, would be the countries who would provide the most of the contingent. They talk, by the way, to countries outside European Union, including Turkey. They talk, according to the rumors, they said that they are talking to China, which is a lie. India, Indonesia, they mention. My question is, first, President Trump, who, as I mentioned already, seems to understand much more about what is going on than any European leader, except I would highlight Hungary and Slovakia. These leaders are quite thoughtful, but it was President Trump who said first many things on NATO, on territories, and he said that when asked about this idea of a contingent, a force, a group, whatever you call it, there should be some discussion between the parties. They say, I think Macron said, no discussion with Russians. Ukraine is a sovereign country. It has the right to invite anybody. And they are inviting us. In brackets, I would repeat what Zelensky said. We don't need peacekeepers, we need fighting units. So make your own conclusion. But Kit Kellogg, by the way, yesterday said that why don't we divide Ukraine like we divided Berlin after World War II? Then he said he was misunderstood, misspoken, but everybody is missing the key point. Imagine, yes, the leaders of Brussels bureaucracy, they say we must reach a deal which at the end of the day must guarantee Ukraine sovereignty. They, by the way, didn't mention territorial integrity, but sovereignty. My question is to them. You mean you want to have peacekeepers to keep the same regime which is now headed by Zelensky? You don't want to ask this regime whether it would be interested in implementing the international commitments, including UN Charter, regarding the rights of minorities for national minorities, language and religious rights. Nobody is raising the issue. So my conclusion is that by ignoring the gross violation of all the international norms about human beings, by ignoring these norms and violations by Zelensky of these norms, and at the same time by discussing deployment of something military, call it peacekeeping, call it stabilization force, on the remaining part of Ukraine, they want to use this force not to keep peace, but to keep and protect the Nazist regime. And this is key. Everything else is smokescreen.
You mentioned the important talks that were going on in Riyadh and some of the conversations you had with the American delegation. Also, what was talked about is safe navigation in the Black Sea. We know that there was a process going on in building this with the Turkish side, with the Republic of Turkey. What is your stance in terms of developing this?
It was one of the proposals mentioned by President Trump in his latest phone conversation with President Putin. And President Putin said, okay, but we have to specify the deal the way which would not allow the failure of the first one to be repeated. And the first one was in 2022. It was a package, guarantees for Ukrainian exports, and the second part of the package was memorandum between the UN and Russia to guarantee the exports from Russia by ensuring normal freight rates, insurance rates, by ensuring the right of the Russian bulkers with fertilizers, with grain, to call on European in Mediterranean ports and so on and so forth. Just the normal terms of trade, no concessions. And the Ukrainian part of the deal was implemented. The Russian not even started. We don't blame the United Nations, whose representatives were trying, and they continue to try, because formally the Russian UN deal lasts until July this year. It was a 3-year deal, while deal on Ukraine was 1 year. And of course, after the first year elapsed, we said thank you very much. We don't want to play one way. And then Secretary General Guterres was trying, Secretary General of UNCTAD, Rebecca Greenspan was trying, but the UN position, the UN Secretariat position, was very, tricky. Basically, they were saying we cannot touch sanctions. De facto, they recognized unilateral sanctions as legitimate. So they told us, we will try to find a way bypassing sanctions so that we don't violate them. And they have been trying to do this for almost 3 years, and to no avail. So when it is not for the first time that this Black Sea topic is popping up again. Last year, President Erdogan, I think in March, proposed to President Putin to resume the deal. He said that Zelensky is ready to cooperate. The proposal was different from the original deal because the original deal provided for inspections of the Ukrainian cargo vessels going back to Ukrainian ports to make sure that they don't carry any weapons. Last year, the proposal by President Erdogan to President Putin was to trust me. It would be an announcement that there are no weapons on board and it would be allowed to go. It was not an easy situation, but President Putin said that he will support it, provided President Erdogan used his good offices to discipline Ukrainians so that they don't violate. And then at the last moment, Zelensky refused.
Even that?
Even that. Actually, he first added, President Erdogan called President Putin and said Zelensky also wants to add commitment not to attack nuclear power stations. Putin said, okay, it has nothing to do with Black Sea traffic, but okay. And then when he agreed to this addition, Zelensky refused. So we are coming again and again to this situation. In the meantime, Ukrainians, frankly speaking, I don't think they complain about difficulties for their grain being exported. They send a lot on dumping prices to European Union. European Union is not happy, and instead of doing something about this situation for the sake of their citizens, Brussels people threaten to stop importing any grain from Russia. They're very specific leaders. They say that Kaja Kallas, Annalena Baerbock, they were saying yes when criticized by the people who saying we live worse than before. Yes, we understand, but our electorate should suffer for the sake of Ukraine. While at the same time, thousands and thousands of Ukrainians living there in Europe in luxury, buying very expensive vehicles. But this is what European elite calls European values, which they defend in the person of Zelensky regime. So this time when President Trump suggested another Black Sea deal, Putin said, yeah, we are ready, but we need to draw lessons from the past. And let's make sure before we launch it, let's resolve the things on freight, insurance, calling on the ports. The Americans took this and they are considering, they didn't come back to us after this. Another initiative of President Trump was 30-day moratorium, not a total ceasefire, but 30-day moratorium on attacking energy infrastructure. During this phone conversation, President Putin immediately agreed, and he gave orders to the Chief of General Staff to stop attacking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, even infrastructure related to the military. At that moment, 7 drones, Russian drones, were airborne. And Putin gave order to shut them down, which was done. Since then, we have been keeping the word, and Ukrainians have been attacking us from the very beginning, every passing day, maybe with 2 or 3 exceptions. And I gave to our colleagues from Turkey, to Minister Fidan, what we give to Americans, to UN, to OSCE, the list of facts, listing the attacks by Ukraine during the last 3 weeks against Russian energy infrastructure. I understand he hates all Russians, so he gives orders. Either he gives orders and they are not taken, or he is lying that he is giving these orders. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and
Has there been any direct or indirect contact by the Ukrainian side here in Antalya?
not to my knowledge. I came here to work.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our allocated time. I've talked about relations with the West, the United States, the situation in Ukraine. If any esteemed journalist has a question on anything else.
From China.
Yes, from China.
Yeah, Mr. Minister, would you think that the President Trump or some guys around President Trump has said they would like to adopt sort of the country-neutral approach to drive the way between Russia and China and realign with Russia after the aftermath of the Ukrainian war? How would you see, how would you evaluate this kind of so-called the country-neutral approach?
You mean to do what? To
Yeah, to make the ties between US and Russia closer and drive the way between Russia and China. Would that have effect?
look, I can only tell you that in none of our contacts with the Americans, in none, be it phone conversation, be it meeting in person, this issue was never raised or even hinted upon. Never. And I think that President Trump and his people, they are very experienced in life. And when you understand life, it's much easier to do politics. And since he understands life, I believe those who understand life, they would never even think about trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We'd like to thank Minister Sergei Lavrov for your insights and for your candor and for your participation here at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. Thank you very much. The next session begins in 13 minutes. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Mr. Sergei Lavrov.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, an uninterrupted speech, uninterrupted program with Sergei Lavrov. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you have, like and subscribe, click that notification button so when we get more information out, you can get information in. I believe that last question that was asked by the Chinese were the Russian Federation, were they approached by the United States and told not to be dealing with China anymore. And Sergei Lavrov said, yeah, they're not gonna do that because they understand the politics between us and China, and nothing's gonna separate that. So they're smarter than that. Once again, we want to thank you all for watching. Have a blessed day. Bye bye.